I've just finished this book, so today is going to be another book review. This book is called How to Be a Dictator by Frank Dikötter. He is so I picked this book up for two reasons. The first one is because of the author. He's a chair professor of humanities at the University of Hong Kong and a senior fellow at the Harvard Institution. So he does a lot of things on the humanities aspect. And I wanted to pick a book up on Dictator because, well, I was waiting for my lunch table to be ready. There's a library upstairs, so I went to the library, picked up a book. And I have another book called The Dictator's Handbook. It's with my friend, and I do need to get my book back. And I wanted to compare across both of the books. That book, The Dictator's Handbook, is one of a fantastic favorite books of mine. It's just so packed with information, and it goes into, I think, six different steps of how to become a dictator by a systemic change through voting in a democratic way to become a dictator. And then, of course, the non-democratic way as well. So I wanted to get another book just to compare, how people view dictators and how dictators came to be. Let me start with the general feedback of the book itself, the context and the feedback of the book, and then I'll go into some insights that I have learned. So the general feedback is that I do not recommend this book. This book, so you can see that this book is quite thin, and how. So this book is quite thin, and in it covers one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. Yes, it covers eight different dictators: Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Kim Il Sung, uh, the Romanian guy. I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, but Koseku and Mengistu of Ethiopia and Duvalier of Haiti. The general things I took away from the book. Okay, so firstly, okay, general ones, then I compare between this How to Be a Dictator and also the Dictator's Handbook. So the general gist is that everything is trying to blame the Soviet Union. It's like every fault came because the USSR was somehow backing, or communism, socialism is the reason these dictators rose to power. I think there's some truth in that, but completely just blaming communism to lead to the rise of dictatorship is not very accurate, because we see dictatorship in a lot of other situations. Like in the modern world of today, we have the United States and Donald Trump. Very, very similar aspects to creating a cult like personality, as we have seen in these eight dictators. We also have, I would say, maybe I would call it a benevolent dictator that we have in Singapore. Maybe less about a dictator, maybe more authoritarian. Lee Kuan Yew, I think he was a very, very good leader, and he had some dictatorial power. However, he did use that for good. We go into details later of what I've learned about all these like common themes of dictatorship. So I think the book is quite, number one, the book is quite biased. Number two, the thing about this book is that they talk about the cult personality of these eight dictators, right? They didn't talk very much about the economic policies. They didn't talk very much about the actual things being done. It's very general brief, like, oh, the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution of Mao, or just very general gist of what is being said and done. Like Koseku, the Romanian dictator, he really wanted to promote himself as internationally recognized. De Villiers also wants to be known, recognized internationally, and talked about that, but all alluding back to the cult. I think that the theme of the book is kind of like how they built the cult. But I find the book it's just skimming the surface. It just talks about what they did, what is the result of this cult-like personality, not how or why. The book is called How to Be a Dictator, not what being a dictator is like with a cult personality. I don't need a description of what is being done. I'm more interested in the how part. And they're just skimming a lot of the surface. So I don't think this book is very interesting, it's not very informative. If anything, it got me to learn more about the other dictators. So I of course I've heard about Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, and Kim, but Mengistu, Kosciuszko, and De Villiers are not people that I have, read about because they don't really impact Asia. So I got to learn more about them, and I think that's an interesting segue to learn more about these countries and the history. But it doesn't give me enough information. It doesn't go into details about what is being done. Also, going back to capitalism and dictatorship, like Philippines, right? Marcos, I think the guy Marcos something. He was a dictator as well in the Philippines. He stole a lot of money from the Philippines. So it is. I think this book is very very. It's just not worth your time reading. I think it. I wish it goes more into details. I wish it's more impactful with its content, not just skimming the surface. I feel, and I 100% get more information out of reading a Wikipedia page of one of these dictators than actually reading the chapters. So I don't recommend this book. I would also say I'll compare this book, How to Be a Dictator, with the Dictator's Handbook, which I highly recommend. The Dictator's Handbook is by an author that I really, really like. Let me He is an economist, and that's how I got to know him because I was reading a few of his other works, and I wanted to figure out what other books he has written, and I found out about that. Okay, so his name is Bruce Bueno de Maquita. No, Bruce Bueno de Mesquita. Yes. So he's an economist, and he focuses on politics slash game theory. So I got to know him through one of these game theory things he has written. And he applies game theory in the context of geopolitics. Then I found out he had so many other books, so many other papers, and I got to buy his books and become a big fan of him. He comes from a very academic rigor. And the reason I wanted to get this book is because this guy came from the academia space. So I give a lot of value to academics who are specializing in the field and they write books about it because you can always read the papers, but the books become a much easier way to understand what they're talking about. Then you go and read more about their papers. So Bruce Bueno de Mesquita, he is an economist, and the way he analyzes things is a lot more analytical. It's a lot more rigor. There's a lot more data involved. And I and so in his book, I think it's like 6, 7 different steps of how to become a dictator. It's a handbook. It goes to a lot more case studies. It goes into the how. It goes into the why, and it goes into what the outcome is. It has a lot more rigor in it. And then they give different examples of of dictators, and it's a even if it's a smaller segment like mayors of a small city in the US. How do they rig the system? So that's a lot more interesting, I think, because it has a lot more of the how part. Not that I'm interested to be one, just that it gives you a lot more insights of what is being done to get to the stage of how we have dictators existing amongst us. It's not that someone wakes up one day and becomes a dictator. And it's not just about they talk about themselves in a cult like personality. I think that's one aspect of it. There's a lot more that is missing in this book of How to Be a Dictator. I think the book tries to focus on the cult personality, but again, it just really skims the surface. I don't think it's a meaningful book. I don't think it's packed with information, packed with knowledge. It just feels like someone read Wikipedia, did a few article research on encyclopedia, and tries to put some information together, puts it into a book, and that's it. I don't know a lot about all of these people, of course, but I know that for Mao, I was in Shanghai and I was in Beijing. I was in a lot of museums trying to learn about the history and understand it from the perspective of people in that country. I think history is never just one-sided. History is where you have different perspectives, you have the different winners and losers, the different participants in a historical event, and getting accounts of all of them helps to give you a balanced view of what actually went on. So because I was in Shanghai, I was in Beijing, I was learning, going to museums, just being an open mind, reading about all of these things that's happening. I can tell you just from of the 8 dictators here, I only went a little bit deeper to one of them. because there isn't exactly, museums talking about all these other dictators. And it is like the chapter here is just absolutely skimming the surface. It's just feel like I wasted my time. So that is my thoughts on the book, and I need to go soon, so I'll quickly give you some insights that I've learned from the book. So in the book, one of the things that they really bring up is that fear alone can't sustain dictatorship. You What they do is that they keep replacing the head of staff, they're replacing the key leaders so that they don't become too powerful and overthrow the dictator, and then the dictators are like super um I want to say like OCD, caring about every single little detail that's going on in the country. And it you, that fear and that control alone can't sustain dictatorship. All of these dictators fell. And the key thing is there needs to be a systemic change. Dictatorship is not just in the Soviet communist world, it happens absolutely in the capitalistic world as well, or the democratic world that we live in. So it's for dictatorship to sustain, you need to have a systemic change. And we see that in a lot of these modern day dictators around the world. In fact, I do have another book called The Dictators, and these are different speeches by dictators. And yeah, I'm only just starting. I'm still early in the book. I find dictators very interesting, very fascinating, and yeah, I think that's very very fun. Okay, second thing is fear alone, although it can't sustain dictatorship, is very helpful, especially to get someone to rise in power. And you need to have a cult force. You need to have a cult. Without a cult, you just cannot be a dictator. Okay, you need to have a cult, at least coming from this book. Although, okay, that's the thing, right? They're talking about creating a cult. But I want to say, even in today, even in modern day, you see a lot of dictators around. They do have a cult, and I don't think a cult itself is a bad thing. You can have good cults, you can have bad cults. I mean, a good cult is called a fan club, maybe a fans, and then a bad one is just a cult. So I think having a driving force of local population is going to be very powerful. Media is absolutely key. You need to own the media. You need the media to be your puppet to say whatever you need to be heard. The Soviet Union was very strong. Wow. I think this book is trying to get me away from the Soviet Union and talk about how Soviet Union is the reason everything is they all become dictators and so many people died. But I'm surprised that Soviet Union is actually really strong. I don't know much about the Soviet Union to a big degree. I know that they exist. I know some history about them, but I didn't know they were so strong. They were supporting so many countries and organizations around the world. Um, but I guess a reason why a lot of people want to be like them is because they have a collectivization method, which means peasants are forced to give up their individual farms and join the large collective farms, and this is all state owned. So whoever runs the country basically owns all the assets that's generated by the farmers and generated by the country. So you do have a lot of power that way. Marx, Engels, and Lenin, these are the three people that are, it's the common denominator that all the dictators are like, yes, these guys are correct. I don't always bullshit them. I don't always put them and show them in my country, but these three people, I agree. Whereas, you have your Trotsky, you have your Stalin, they mix reviews. And all these dictators inspire each other. Mussolini inspired Hitler, Mao inspired North Korea, Soviet Union inspired Mao, North Korea inspired Mengistu. It's all like feeding upon each other to create more, to increase their cult personality or increase their charisma in the country. Crazy. And oh my gosh, so many deaths. So many deaths. All right, I need to go now. So that's a very quick review of this book, How to Be a Dictator. Do not recommend, do not appreciate it. I don't think it's very informative. I don't think it's very packed with information. Better to read Wikipedia.